Argentina, known for its passionate tango and vast pampas, has been wrestling with economic turmoil for years. Inflation has been a persistent problem, making life difficult for everyday Argentines. In this climate of uncertainty, a radical figure emerged, Javier Milei. An economist with bold libertarian ideas, Milei promised a complete break from the past. His victory last year sent shockwaves through Argentina and beyond. He was a stark departure from the country's traditional political landscape. Many were drawn to his promises of a smaller government and a more free market economy. Milei's supporters hoped he would be the one to finally tame inflation and put Argentina on a path to prosperity. But his critics feared his radical approach would only exacerbate existing inequalities. From the outset, Milei made it clear he was not afraid to make drastic changes. He called his economic plan a shock therapy, designed to jolt the country out of its economic slumber. Central to Milei's plan was a significant reduction in government spending. He argued that Argentina's bloated public sector was inefficient and a drain on the economy. Subsidies, which had long been a part of Argentina's economic fabric, were slashed. These subsidies had helped make essential goods and services more affordable for ordinary people. But Milei saw them as market distortions that needed to be removed. He also implemented significant cuts to the public sector workforce, arguing that the government was overstaffed and burdened by bureaucracy. In the immediate aftermath of Milei's policy changes, there were some signs of progress. The most notable achievement was a significant decrease in the monthly inflation rate. This was a welcome relief for many Argentines who had seen their purchasing power eroded by soaring prices. The value of the Argentine peso also saw some stabilization, narrowing the gap between the official exchange rate and the informal or blue market rate. This stabilization was partly attributed to a tax amnesty program that encouraged Argentines to bring their money back into the formal banking system. However, these early positive indicators came at a cost. The cuts to social programs and public sector jobs had a direct and immediate impact on the most vulnerable segments of Argentine society. The human cost of austerity. As Milei's economic plan began to bite, the social consequences became increasingly apparent. The poverty rate, already a concern before Milei took office, skyrocketed. More than half of all Argentines now live below the poverty line, a stark reminder of the human cost of these economic reforms. The situation is particularly dire for those living in extreme poverty. These are people who struggle to afford even the most basic necessities, like food and shelter. Soup kitchens and food banks, once a safety net for the most vulnerable, are now overwhelmed by the sheer number of people seeking assistance. Their resources are stretched thin, and they are struggling to keep up with the growing demand. Pensioners who rely on fixed incomes have seen their purchasing power decimated by inflation. Many are now faced with impossible choices between buying food, medicine, or paying for other essential expenses. The government's narrative. Despite the growing social unrest, the Milei administration remains steadfast in its defense of its economic policies. Government officials argue that the pain being felt by many Argentines is necessary and unavoidable. They claim that the previous government's populist policies, which focused on social spending and government intervention in the economy, are to blame for Argentina's economic woes. They maintain that Milei's reforms, while initially difficult, are the only way to create a more sustainable and prosperous future for Argentina. They point to the decrease in inflation and the stabilization of the peso as early signs of success. According to them, these short-term sacrifices will pave the way for long-term economic growth and stability. Voices from the ground. However, for those on the front lines of Argentina's economic crisis, the government's narrative rings hollow. At soup kitchens and community centers across the country, people share stories of hardship and despair. They talk about struggling to feed their families, skipping meals, and having to choose between paying rent and buying medicine. Many feel abandoned by the government and express anger and frustration at the lack of support. They question whether the promised long-term benefits will ever materialize, and if they will be around to see them. The social fabric of Argentina is being stretched, and in some cases, torn. A nation on edge. 1 year into Milei's presidency, Argentina finds itself at a crossroads. The country is deeply divided, with some praising Milei's bold reforms while others decry the social cost. The decrease in inflation and the relative stability of the peso offer a glimmer of hope, suggesting that Milei's radical approach might be yielding some positive economic results. However, the human cost of these reforms is undeniable. The rise in poverty, the strain on social services, and the growing sense of desperation among many Argentines paint a starkly different picture. The future remains uncertain. It is too early to say whether Milei's gamble will pay off in the long run, or whether the social cost of his reforms will ultimately outweigh any economic gains.